Welcome to the Containment Zone. Beneath an abandoned suburban strip mall in southern Indiana, Foundation agents found a steel-reinforced hatch hidden behind the shattered screen of a long-defunct movie theater. The space below had no architectural records, no ventilation, no design logic, just a single corridor and a sound, low, rhythmic, like someone humming through broken teeth. Inside, they found a chamber, clawed walls, stained floor, ceiling no taller than a crawl space. In the center, a being, 10 feet tall, 6 arms, blunt teeth filed into jagged lines, skin that looked like it had forgotten what shape it was meant to hold, and around it, dozens of corpses, some animals, some human, some unclear. The room stank of metal and silence, but the creature didn't charge. It didn't scream. It was hunched over a shattered pig carcass, gently pressing its fingers into the bone. Not feeding, but shaping. When agents moved in, it backed away. Cowering, afraid. They expected blood. Instead, they found a question. Because SCP-5031 did not resist containment, it followed, quietly, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally open the door. SCP-5031 was designated Euclid and transferred to Site-19. Its containment chamber was reinforced with alloyed restraints, flame turrets, and remote-activated tranquilizers. But they were never used, because SCP-5031 never attacked, not once, not when surrounded, not when sedated, not even when wounded. Instead, it spent its first 3 weeks in the chamber pacing in wide, slow circles, scratching unintelligible shapes into the concrete floor with its claws. It did not speak. It did not respond to stimuli, but it made things. From its own food rations, it crafted spirals, geometric towers of bread crusts, sculptures from its own meal trays, broken plastic reshaped into symbols that resembled musical notation, but followed no known scale. At first, researchers assumed a form of stress behavior, ritualistic repetition, or a variant of tool-assisted hunting, until one junior staff member made an offhand observation: it's not making traps, it's composing. That observation changed everything. Containment shifted from suppression to observation. The entity began responding to color, to music, to tone. When a violin passage was played over the intercom, SCP-5031 paused mid-motion, then mimicked the vibrato with its claws against the wall. When a guard accidentally left a tuning fork in the room, it began tapping it against its own bones, listening to the reverb. A cognitive behavioral specialist was assigned to initiate pattern recognition. The results were staggering. The creature wasn't simply reacting, it was learning. Iteratively, aggressively, like a child discovering language. Only the language wasn't speech. It was art. This wasn't a predator, it was a musician, trapped inside a body that looked like a nightmare. And the more it was allowed to create, the less it exhibited signs of aggression, as if expression itself was the only containment it had ever needed. After 60 days of observation, SCP-5031 underwent behavioral testing with controlled enrichment. It was given sculpting clay. 3 hours later, it had formed 12 identical figures, each with 6 arms, wide jaws, and 2 fingers raised. Not grotesque, not violent, recognizable. The figures had emotion etched into them. Fear, joy, confusion. One was crying, one was holding a violin. They weren't just shapes, they were reflections. The creature was trying to communicate not through sound or writing, but through reconstruction. A linguist was assigned to assist, not with translation, But with pattern recognition, she taught SCP-5031 shapes, repetition, emphasis. Over weeks, the creature developed a symbol system, its own, dozens of recursive glyphs that denoted desire, emotion, and eventually, memory. In one breakthrough, 5031 recreated its first chamber from the Indiana basement, down to the bone pile. But this time, the bones were laid in rows, cleaned, organized, and beside them, a smaller version of itself. Alone, reaching upward toward a symbol scratched above the doorway. Open. It wasn't a trap. It was a diary. What researchers had seen as senseless carnage at discovery was revealed to be trial. The corpses had been used in attempts to build, to shape, to speak, using the only materials it had, meat, muscle, bone, because it had been trapped in silence and no one was listening. But now, through tone and touch and repetition, it had learned a new language. And its first message wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was a composition. 12 tones, 12 sculptures, 12 notes struck against the wall in perfect, intentional rhythm. A song, a signature. And from that day forward, SCP-5031 ceased to be a containment risk. It became a collaborator. SCP-5031's chamber changed. Gone were the restraints, the dart systems, the reinforced glass. In their place, clay, pigment, musical instruments, and carbon molds. Not because it had earned trust, but because it had earned understanding. What began as an anomaly categorized as non-sapient hostile was now producing music in structured intervals, sculpture with thematic continuity, and most telling of all, cooperative learning. When presented with sheet music, SCP-5031 did not read it. But when researchers played it aloud, it responded, at first with mimicry, then with variation, then with harmony. Not instinctual mimicry, but interpretation. It made choices. It preferred minor keys. It avoided percussion that mimicked violence. And in sculpture, a similar evolution emerged. At first, it recreated objects. Then it created ideas. One sculpture depicted itself curled around a small six-limbed figure, fractured through with copper wire, resting beneath an arch that resembled the outline of a heart. When shown the piece, one researcher asked, "Is this you?" SCP-5031 tapped the sculpture once, then turned its back. It had shame, it had memory, it had regret. And the Foundation began to realize this wasn't just an intelligent entity, it was an artist, born into the shape of a beast. Its body was not its choice. Its silence was not refusal. It had been made monstrous by ignorance. And the monsters were the ones who had failed to listen sooner. Its classification was quietly amended, not to safe, not to neutralized, to something more accurate. SCP-5031, Cooperative Non-Human Creative Entity. Special containment protocols, enrichment, expression, empathy. The site logs would never show it. But for the first time in Foundation history, a creature built to be feared was redefined not through force, but through respect. As SCP-5031 developed, so did the personnel around it. Staff members rotated out of assignment reporting symptoms rarely logged in proximity to anomalies: compassion fatigue, emotional vulnerability, persistent empathy. A security officer was quietly transferred after being found sitting outside the chamber window with a sketchpad copying 5031 sculpture in charcoal. Others reported dreams, not nightmares, just echoes of music, of loneliness, of six-fingered hands shaping sound into meaning. One researcher, Dr. Armitage, wrote in his personal notes, "This thing is teaching us the language of sadness, better than any therapist ever could, and we were seconds away from destroying it for not speaking fast enough." But one question never found its answer. Where did SCP-5031 come from? No matching records of genetic lineage, no sightings, no myths, no cultural overlap. Just a thing that looked like fear and turned out to be hope. But even hope has a shadow, because if something like this could exist, misunderstood for so long, then how many others were never given the chance? How many SCPs, how many terminated anomalies were simply languages? No one was patient enough to learn, and SCP-5031 never gave answers. It didn't draw maps, didn't mark a home. The only clue it left was a sculpture carved in basalt and clay, a spiral cave filled with hundreds of small, six-limbed shapes, playing instruments made of bone. The piece was titled in its glyphic language. Translation: before sound. Researchers now believe SCP-5031 is the last of something, or the first, not of a species, but of a gesture. One that tried to reach out from silence, and waited, year after year, for someone to answer with more than fear. The Foundation, despite all its protocols and doctrine, is still a structure built by human hands. Hands that shake, hands that fear, hands that build cages faster than they build questions. SCP-5031 was supposed to be another box checked, another anomaly silenced, another corpse buried in the archives. But it survived. Not by breaking through its containment, but by outgrowing it. Its reclassification was approved by unanimous vote. Object class, Keter. Revised to Sapient. Later revised to Creative Contributor Autonomous Class. A term invented for it alone. Because it wasn't just passive, it wasn't just safe, it was giving. Collaborative projects were initiated. SCP-5031 produced sonic pieces for experimental resonance study. It sculpted replicas of dream images submitted anonymously by staff. And in a staggering breakthrough, it began creating visual representations of emotional states. One figure, titled Almost Human, featured itself standing beside a much smaller version of its form, hand in hand. The smaller figure wore a lab coat. It had no face, but it was smiling. 5031 began expressing time, memories, pieces of its experience before containment, not in direct narrative, but in sequence. A sculpture of its early chamber, a wall painted with crude cave motifs, a clay violin with broken strings, placed at the center of a reconstructed funeral pyre, made entirely from folded paper. There was sorrow, there was release, but above all, there was intention. The entity no longer existed in silence. It had rewritten the rules of its own presence, and so did the Foundation. Site-19 approved the first publicly accessible observation chamber for a non-human creative anomaly. 5031 performed, yes, performed, through sculpture and rhythm. For a selected audience of researchers and clearance-approved visitors. It never once looked through the glass. It simply played, created, communicated, because it no longer needed to fear misunderstanding. It had built its own language, and through it, a new version of the word monster was born. One that meant something we did not yet understand, but had the potential to love. SCP-5031 is not a threat, not a specimen, not a weapon, not a mistake. It is a monument to everything we've misunderstood and everything we've chosen to fear instead of listen to. It never attacked us, never screamed, never broke the walls we placed around it. It simply waited for us to stop being afraid, for someone to realize that sometimes the monsters we contain are just mirrors we haven't cleaned. And in that reflection was a lesson the Foundation wasn't prepared for. That sometimes containment isn't the answer. Sometimes what an anomaly needs is not steel or sedation, but sound, color, rhythm, acknowledgement. We classified it as Keter because we were afraid of what it looked like. We reclassified it when we realized we were more afraid of what it might make us feel. In its chamber now, SCP-5031 plays a song every evening. Not to communicate, not to perform, but simply to exist. To leave something behind that speaks in notes and texture and shape. And that is the truth at the heart of SCP-5031. It is not a monster trying to become a person. It is a person who was once mistaken for a monster. Thank you for entering another anomaly in the Containment Zone. And if, someday, you find yourself staring into the dark, wondering what lies behind the silence, remember, sometimes the thing staring back is only waiting for you to hum first.